What's up, guys? It's your boy Palpy. So, we need to talk about something that's been eating at me lately. Star Wars Battlefront 2 just had the most insane comeback story in gaming history. I'm talking about breaking all-time player records 8 years after launch. And now everyone's asking, is it dying again? And honestly, the answer is way more complicated than you'd think. Because while the headlines are screaming about record-breaking player counts and EA finally paying attention, there's some dark stuff happening behind the scenes that could kill this Resurgence dead in its tracks. Many of you have been deep in the Battlefront trenches since 2017, lived through the loot box disaster, watched the game get abandoned, and somehow witnessed its resurrection in 2025. Today, we're going to break down exactly what's happening with Battlefront 2 right now, why this comeback is both a miracle and potentially doomed, and what it tells us about the gaming industry as a whole. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why this situation is so much bigger than just one game's player count. Let's start with the facts that have everyone's jaws on the floor. In May 2025, that's 8 years after launch, 5 years after EA officially ended support, Battlefront 2 absolutely exploded. We're talking about going from around 1,000 daily players on Steam to breaking the all-time concurrent record not once, not twice, but multiple times in just a few weeks. The numbers are genuinely insane. The game peaked at over 35,000 concurrent players on Steam alone in June 2025. To put that in perspective, that's higher than some AAA games get at launch. Remember, this is a game that EA literally abandoned in 2020, saying their vision was complete. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is something most people don't realize. Steam only represents a fraction of Battlefront 2's actual player base. The game launched on Steam in 2020, a full 3 years after its original release. So most long-term players are still on Origin, the EA app, or consoles. Industry insiders were claiming the game hit over 160,000 concurrent players across all platforms during the peak of this resurgence. That's absolutely mental for a game that was supposedly dead. What triggered this explosion? It's actually the perfect storm of Star Wars hype. You had Andor Season 2 wrapping up to critical acclaim, May the 4th celebrations, the 20th anniversary re-release of Revenge of the Sith hitting theaters, and massive Star Wars events in Fortnite. But the real catalyst was the community itself. Content creators and longtime fans organizing coordinated efforts to boost player counts and get EA's attention for Battlefront 3. And it worked. EA actually acknowledged the resurgence in their quarterly earnings call, saying Battlefront 2 contributed significantly to their $214 million in revenue, up 27% from the previous quarter. When a massive corporation like EA specifically calls out a 5-year-old game in their investor meetings, you know something big is happening. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty numbers because this is where things get really fascinating. Looking at the Steam data from active player, we can see some wild patterns. In April 2025, the game was averaging around 783 daily players. By May, that jumped to 6,049. That's a 672% increase in 1 month. June saw it hit 12,743 average daily players, with peaks reaching 36,381. But here's what's really crazy. According to multiple sources, Steam represents maybe 10 to 20% of the total player base at most. The vast majority of players are still on the EA app, Epic Games Store, PlayStation, and Xbox. If we extrapolate those Steam numbers, we're potentially looking at 100,000 plus daily active users across all platforms during the peak. And this isn't just a flash in the pan. The resurgence has been sustained for months now. Even as I'm recording this in August 2025, the game is still maintaining significantly higher player counts than it had in years. What makes this even more remarkable is the game's history. Battlefront 2 had one of the most disastrous launches in gaming history thanks to the loot box controversy. EA's infamous Reddit comment about pride and accomplishment became the most downvoted comment in Reddit history. The game was literally the poster child for predatory microtransactions and almost killed the entire franchise. But DICE actually turned it around. They spent over 2 years adding free content updates, completely overhauling the progression system, and basically rebuilding the game from scratch. By 2020, when support officially ended, it had become genuinely great. The problem was, by then the damage was done, and most people had moved on. Now here's where things get dark, and this is probably the biggest threat to Battlefront 2's resurgence. The game is facing a massive hacking crisis that's making it literally unplayable for many people. We're not talking about your typical aimbotters or wall hackers here. These hackers have found ways to completely break the game's servers. They can prevent players from spawning, crash entire lobbies, force players into spectator cameras, and spam fake admin messages. It's so bad that high-profile streamers like Shroud, Moist Critical, and XQC have tried to play the game live and had their streams ruined by hackers. The worst part? These aren't even players in the match. Hackers can join a lobby, break it, and leave, while the broken lobby remains unplayable for everyone else. They're essentially holding the entire PC player base hostage. This has been building for over a year, according to Reddit posts, but it exploded during the Resurgence when the game got more attention. DICE did deploy some server-side fixes in collaboration with the Kyber modding team, but it's an ongoing battle. What's particularly frustrating is that this is happening just as the game was having its moment. Imagine being a new player, hearing about this amazing comeback, buying the game, and then literally being unable to play because of hackers. It's killing the momentum and could seriously damage the community's efforts to prove there's demand for Battlefront 3.
But here's where the story gets really interesting.
The community has basically taken matters into their own hands. The Kyber project is probably the most impressive community effort I've ever seen in gaming. Kyber is essentially a complete replacement for EA's infrastructure. It's a custom server platform and mod launcher that supports full gameplay mods, proximity voice chat, stat tracking, and dedicated 24/7 servers. The team has even developed their own replacement for the EA app called Maxima. What's wild is that Kyber servers often have better experiences than official EA servers. The Battlefront Plus mod, which runs on many Kyber servers, adds dozens of new heroes, reinforcements, and maps. We're talking about content that makes the game feel like the Battlefront 3 we never got. The crazy part? EA is actually working with the Kyber team instead of shutting them down. When the hacking crisis hit, EA collaborated with Kyber developers to deploy fixes. That's almost unprecedented for a major publisher. Usually they just send cease and desist letters. This isn't the first time we've seen a quote-unquote dead game come roaring back to life, but Battlefront 2's situation is pretty unique. Let's look at some comparisons. The closest parallel is probably No Man's Sky. Both games had catastrophic launches due to missing features and broken promises. Both developers spent years quietly rebuilding their games with free updates, and both eventually found new audiences who discovered the fixed versions. But there's a key difference. No Man's Sky was still being actively developed when it made its comeback. Battlefront 2 has been officially abandoned for 5 years. This is more like if No Man's Sky had been canceled in 2018 and then spontaneously exploded in popularity in 2023. Another comparison is Fall Guys, which went from 60 million players to basically dead to becoming huge again when it went free to play. But again, that required active developer intervention and a complete business model change. Maybe the better comparison is older games like Age of Empires 2 or Counter-Strike 1.6, which maintained dedicated communities for decades after official support ended. But those games never had explosive resurgences like this. They just maintained steady, passionate player bases. What makes Battlefront 2 special is that it's a AAA game with modern production values that's essentially being kept alive by community effort, while also experiencing massive mainstream attention. That combination is almost unheard of. One thing that's been driving me crazy in discussions about Battlefront 2's player count is how much misinformation is floating around. People keep saying the game is dead based solely on Steam numbers, but that's like judging a movie's success based only on one theater chain. Console players especially get overlooked in these discussions. PlayStation and Xbox don't publish their player numbers, so we're basically flying blind. But all the evidence suggests console populations are substantial. The game has been trending in top sellers on both PlayStation and Xbox stores during sales. There's also the Epic Games Store factor. Battlefront 2 was given away for free on Epic, which means there's a whole generation of players who got it there and never show up in Steam stats. When industry insiders were claiming 80 to 90,000 concurrent players across all platforms during the Resurgence, some people were skeptical because Steam only showed 5,000. But if Steam represents 5 to 10% of the total player base, those numbers actually line up perfectly. The fact that EA specifically mentioned Battlefront 2 in their earnings call is huge. Publicly traded companies don't waste time talking about irrelevant revenue streams to investors. When EA's CFO says a 5-year-old game contributed significantly to their quarterly revenue, that means it made them serious money. But here's the thing. EA also said they previously rejected DICE's pitch for Battlefront 3 due to licensing costs. That seems contradictory until you realize what's probably happening behind the scenes. Disney charges massive licensing fees for Star Wars games. For EA to greenlight a new Battlefront, they need to be confident it'll make enough money to justify those costs, plus development expenses. The Resurgence of Battlefront 2 is basically a free market research study showing there's still massive demand for this type of game. Former DICE developers have even outlined realistic plans for how Battlefront 3 could happen. The suggestion is starting with a Battlefront 2 remaster for next-gen consoles, getting a dedicated team familiar with the engine, and then building Battlefront 3 from there. It's a 5 to 6 year plan, but it could actually work. But the streaming attention also highlighted the hacking problem. When major streamers get their broadcasts ruined by hackers, it creates negative press that could seriously damage the game's reputation. It's a double-edged sword. Viral attention brings new players, but also attracts bad actors who want to ruin the experience for everyone. Let's break down what's actually happening on each platform, because the health varies wildly. PC is obviously where most of the action is happening, but it's also where the problems are worst. Steam players are dealing with hackers, but they also have access to Kyber servers and mods. It's the best and worst experience simultaneously. PlayStation seems to be the healthiest overall. Console security makes hacking much harder, and the player base appears stable. Load times are reasonable, and most game modes are playable. Xbox is similar to PlayStation, but seems to have slightly lower populations in some regions. Still perfectly playable for most modes, especially during peak hours. What's happening with Battlefront 2 says something bigger about the gaming industry. We're seeing passionate communities essentially force publishers to pay attention to abandoned games. It's a new form of consumer activism. The fact that a coordinated community effort can create headlines, impact stock prices, and force corporate responses shows how much power engaged fan bases actually have. It's not just about Battlefront 2. It's about proving that games don't have to die just because publishers move on to the next project. This could set a precedent for other abandoned games with passionate communities. Imagine if Titanfall fans organized similar efforts, or if the Anthem community tried this approach. So, is it dying again? Here's my honest take after diving deep into all the data. Battlefront 2 isn't dying, but it's at a critical crossroads. The resurgence is real and sustained. Player counts are still significantly higher than they were before May 2025, even if they've come down from the peak. EA is paying attention, the community is more organized than ever, and projects like Kyber are providing long-term sustainability. But the hacking crisis is a genuine existential threat. If new players can't actually play the game, all the viral marketing in the world won't matter. The community's efforts could be completely undermined by bad actors. My prediction? The game will settle into a quote-unquote cult classic status with a dedicated but smaller player base. Think of games like Deep Rock Galactic or Helldivers 2, not massive mainstream hits, but healthy, passionate communities that can sustain themselves long-term. The dream scenario is that EA sees the sustained interest and greenlights either a Battlefront 2 remaster or Battlefront 3. The nightmare scenario is that hackers completely destroy the PC experience and the momentum dies out. But one thing is certain, the community has proven that Battlefront 2 was never truly dead. It was just sleeping, waiting for the right moment to remind everyone why people fell in love with it in the first place. What do you think? Have you jumped back into Battlefront 2 recently? Let me know in the comments how your experience has been. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button because I've got more investigations into gaming's most interesting stories coming up. Let's aim for 10 likes this video.